but this is a young man by the name of Suri. He's out of the UK, and he has this spoken word piece on
Revolution represent 107.3 FM. My name is Tarek. Now listeners, you may remember not too long ago we had a spoken word artist by the name of Sully Breaks. Came down, dropped the live session, and a lot of you were excited about that. I was excited this morning when I opened up a package, had no idea what it was. Opened it up, put it in the player, pressed play, and it totally blew me away. It's his brand new piece from his brand new The Dorm Room EP. I'm gonna have to let spoken word do what it does best and let it speak for itself. Brand new Sully Breaks.
Right now, there is a kid finishing parents' evening in a heated discussion with his mother, saying, why does he have to study subjects he will never ever use in his life? And she will look at him blank-eyed, stifle a sigh, think for a second, and then lie. She'll say something along the lines of, you know, to get a good job you need a good degree, and these subjects will help you get a good degree. We never had this opportunity when I was younger. And he will reply, but you were young a long time ago, weren't you, Mum? And she won't respond, although what he implies makes perfect sense, that society's needs would have changed since she was 16. But she will ignore him, grip his hand more sternly, then drag him to the car. But what she doesn't know is that she didn't ignore him just to shut him up. She didn't lie because they were just returning from parents' evening and an argument in the hallway would look bad on her resume. She won't lie because she just spent the last 1 hour convincing a stern-faced teacher that she would ensure that her child studies more at home. No, she would lie simply because she does not know any better herself. Although her whole adult life she has never used or applied Pythagoras' theorem, prophetic fallacy, and still does not know the value of X, she will rely on society to tell her that her child, who has one of the sharpest minds in the school, is hyperactive, unfocused, easily distracted, and wayward. Students, how many equations, subjects, and dates did you memorize just before an exam never to use again? How many A grades did you get which were never asked for when you applied for a job? How many times have you remembered something 5 minutes just after the teacher said stop writing, only to receive your results 1 month later to realize that you were only 1 mark short of the top grade? Does that mean remembering 5 minutes earlier would have made you more qualified for a particular job? Well, on the application form it would have. We all have different abilities, thought processes, experiences, and genes. So why is a class full of individuals tested by the same means? So does that mean Sherelle thinks she's dumb because she couldn't do a couple of sums? And if this issue is not addressed properly, it then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Then every school has the audacity to have a policy on equality. The irony. Exams are society's methods of telling you what you're worth. But you can't let society tell you what you are, because it's the same society that tells you that abortion is wrong but then looks down on teenage parents. The same society that sells products to promote natural hair, looks and smooth complexion, with the model on the box half photoshopped and has fake lashes and hair extensions, with pastors that preach charity but own private jets, imams that preach against greed but are all fat, parents that say they want educated kids but constantly marvel at how rich Richard Branson is, governments that preach peace but endorse wars, that say they believe so much in the importance of higher education and further learning, then why increase tuition fees every single year? I believe Miss Jefferson when she took me into the office and said that my exams would be imperative to my success, because we was taught to always follow when Miss Jefferson led. But then I took Jefferson out of the equation and learned to think for myself. I realized we was taught to always follow when Miss led. The irony. Test us with tests, but the finals are never final, because they never prepare us for the biggest test, which is survival. And what I suggest is fairly outlandish, so I do not expect everyone to understand this, except for the kids who knows what it feels like to be worth no more than that D or that A that you get on results day, and the ones whose best stories were never good enough for the English teacher, because apparently you missed out key literal techniques, did not follow the class plan, and the language was too informal for him to understand. But then he'd reference Hamlet and Macbeth, and you'd fight the urge to express your contempt by partially clenching your fist with only your medius finger left protruding in the middle of your hand, and then asked if he was aware that Shakespeare was known as the innovator of slang, or the kid at the back of the class who thinks, why am I studying something that doesn't fuel my drive? But then when confronted with a maths problem, his eyes come alive. So this one is for my generation, the ones who found what they were looking for on Google, the ones who followed their dreams on Twitter, pictured their future on Instagram, accepted destiny on Facebook. This one's for my failures and my dropouts, for my unemployed graduates, my shop assistants, cleaners and cashiers with bigger dreams, my self-employed entrepreneurs, my world changers and my dream chasers. Because the purpose of why I hate school but love education was not to initiate a worldwide debate, but to let them know that whether 72 or 88, 44 or 68, we will not let exam results decide our fate. Peace.
So I wanted to use that to open up this conversation. I think he touched on some of the things that I'll talk about in this lecture, but this idea of standardizing knowledge, right? And how we use standardized knowledge to pretty much perpetuate what I call social hierarchies. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But during my lecture, I hope that this is what you all will gain at the end, to be able to think about how the United States public education system reinforces what I call inequity and inequality. Think about how the United States public education system inadvertently reproduces this idea of an invisible identity for African American youth. And think about how trauma we occurs in the public education system and how that impacts the physical and psychological health of African Americans. And lead with kind of this critical awareness of how policies and practices in the United States education system affects primarily African American youth. So throughout this lecture, I will provide opportunities for you guys definitely to ask questions, but I will have something called open dialogue. And these are kind of spaces for us to kind of just exchange in kind of this conversation. So our first open dialogue is just kind of me asking you, what is the value of education? You think about education. Yes?
To learn something valuable so you can contribute back to society in a
Okay.
meaningful way.
Okay, so to learn something to contribute back to society. Right, very good. What about public? Go ahead, yes.
Well, I guess public education, but education in general is like, I feel like it's empowerment. I mean, the more you know, the more you're able to do for yourself and for other people.
So education is empowerment, I like that. Anybody else? What is education? What is public education? Yes.
I can see public education as an investment in the future.
Okay. There's some debates about whether we should still fund public education, whether you guys are at a public institution. There's a debate about whether tax dollars should continue to fund institutions like North Carolina State, right? So this idea that, anyone else, what is your kind of, when you think about this idea of education and public education, what comes to mind? Yeah.
I guess, referring to like public versus private education kind of debate, I think of public education as the low-cost provider of, a resource of knowledge and wealth for yourself, versus the private, sometimes more prestigious, but also more expensive, and can go back to what you said about the social hierarchy.
Okay, all right. What is the difference between education versus schooling? Yes.
At least I look at it as education is a situation where someone's actually like learning something, again, something valuable to contribute back to society, versus schooling. I think that is more of a process of just sitting in, potentially a room or say sitting in Dr. B's class without obtaining any of that knowledge.
Okay. Yes.
I would say that education is knowledge. Knowledge is power. But schooling is a streamline of information that people don't really know that they think should be.
That they think, right, that you're supposed to know. And so they think you're supposed to know that because of what?
sort of like an indoctrination
Mhm.
of an idea
Mhm.
that should house everyone.
Okay, so an indoctrination, I heard. You guys, anybody else? So I want us to kind of think about the difference between education versus schooling. Because I think that education is connected to empowerment. I think that education affords you opportunities in terms of resources, right, to access resources. But I think schooling is often done in a very different way. I think education is like a mutual exchange, right? That we're exchanging, we're learning from each other. I think schooling is what I call, Paulo Freire talks about the banking concept. I don't know if anybody ever heard of that. So it's just, I as a teacher, I'm doing what? What do you think? I'm just making deposits, right? And I'm not necessarily exchanging with you. And a lot of that is that I'm making those deposits because I want to kind of, what you said, socialize you or indoctrinate you around a particular idea or whatever. Okay, so I want us to kind of think about that during this presentation. I want to start off with, as Dr. Brookins said, I am a community psychologist. How many of you probably, you know a community psychologist, right?
No, we haven't got to that yet. No.
Okay. All right. So I just want to talk about my particular lens. As a community psychologist, we look at systems. We don't look at individual behaviors. We look at systems behavior. So we have any engineers in here? Yay. Okay. So we're thinking of, we take that kind of same framework. My particular framework is thinking about systems from a social justice perspective. So I take my lens and think about how does systems, in terms of the way in which it allocates resources, the way in which it disseminates resources, the way in which people access resources, how that's tied to the unequal distribution of those, right? And how, again, do I, as a community psychologist, work to make sure I'm leveraging that people have access to resources in a very equitable way, okay? I use what Delgado and Stefanczyk talk about, what we call critical race theory. So how race is at the central point of that system and the ways in which resources are allocated. I understand that race intersects ability, race intersects sexual orientation, race intersects class. But I see race as a primary factor in understanding, again, the ways in which resources are disseminated and the ways in which resources are accessed. My work has really emphasized what I call young people in the public education system and young people who I say have been disconnected from the public education system. And so when I think about race, I think about how race leads to stressors, environmental stressors. So if I experience discrimination, if I experience alienation as it relates to my race, how does that do what? How does that lead to stress? And how cumulative stresses over time do what? If you have a lot of stress over time, what happens to you? What do you think? Are you going around, yeah, life is great, awesome. So you have depressive symptoms. You may have heightened levels of anxiety. You may struggle with who I am and my place in this world, right? So we know that that contributes to those stresses. But as we think about stress, as a community psychologist, I have to think about prevention, right? So I take the lens of what they call social ecological resilience. So what is resilience when we think about that quite broadly? What comes to mind when we say, oh, you're very resilient?
Bounce back.
The ability to bounce back. Anyone else? To be resilient. Don't be afraid to engage. Yes.
I guess kind of like move through adversity without setback.
Okay, moving through adversity without setback. I love that.
Using like all of your resources you have available to you.
Mhm. Very good. Very good. So when we think about it from a social ecological perspective, that resilience is about the individual's assets, right? So how, like again, if I have this positive self-worth, how that helps me when I'm navigating my what we call ecology, but also how your ecology, your system provides you with resources. So how do I use those resources or negotiate those resources in order to overcome stress, right? Anybody want to give me an example of what we consider would be a resource?